Welcome to Hope in the Light of Suicide. I'm Tammy White. I'm the founder of the Bobby White Foundation, and this is my lovely co-host.
And I'm Bonni Snyder. How are you guys doing tonight? Welcome to episode 8.
Wow, can you believe we've done 8 episodes already?
I know. Hard to believe. Well, thank you for coming back.
Yeah, really. We had a really good episode last week with Don West Jr. from Knock Out the Stigma. It was, that's something that's very important, not only in regards to suicide, but still today in so many different other realms of our life and society, right?
Especially attached, when we talk about stigma, the, stigma surrounding, again, suicide, as you mentioned, mental health and, those types of, anything. I think for us, we think of, or our focus is on, the stigma as it relates to, again, suicide and mental health.
Right. And there's so many different facets of it. I don't know how to pronounce that word right.
I say facet.
Particularly pertaining to suicide, because you have, not only do you have the suicide death, you have the mental health issue. You have possibly addiction issues that are related to suicide. You have health issues. There was something else. I can't think of it off the top of my name, but there's so many different layers to it that it's just not one thing. And in reality, they all each even still have their own stigma.
And it's interesting because, the majority of my work, I work with children, mostly middle schoolers. And it's fascinating, as we're talking about, especially addictions and whatnot, that, I tell them, I'm going to put a face on addiction. And I don't give them any warning in terms of how am I going to put a face on, the issue of, addiction and mental health and whatnot. And I tell them, I'm going to play you a clip. It's a 3-minute clip. And that's all I say. And then I, shut off the lights, put the clip on. Well, the clip is an interview that I did following Patrick's death. And I'm always amazed, if that's the word I want to use, over the look on, people's faces, my students, when they say, and when the lights, after the 3 minutes are up, and like I said, it's about a 3-minute clip. And I will look at them and say, okay, so what did you guys notice about what you just saw? And, invariably one of the students would say, that was you. And I was like, yes, that was me. And the person that they're talking about is my son. And, so then we start talking about stigma, sometimes, guys, people who deal with substance use, whether it is, and I talked to them about Aiden. And I was like, okay, Patrick in August, Aiden in February. Sometimes in families, the person who, is the matriarch of the family, sometimes a person who is thought of as, the head of the family, or in my case, the matriarch, they look like me.
Right.
Sometimes, and I tell them, I was once asked a question in terms of, well, you're in mental health. How did this happen to you? And it's like, it gets those thought processes started for some people, because it's like stigma does not discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're rich. It doesn't matter if you're poor. It doesn't matter, if you live in the big house on the hill, or if you live in, the tent. We used to call them tent cities. If you live in tent city, it affects potentially anybody.
Oh, most definitely. When I started speaking last year, I put together a PowerPoint. And one of the slides of the PowerPoint is, and if, that's one thing about our show. We never know what we're going to talk about, so sometimes we don't have pictures of what we're talking about. But one of the slides in my PowerPoint is a collage of different pictures of my husband and my husband and I. And what I say at that point is, this is what the face of suicide looks like. That's what the face of suicide looks like. You wouldn't, how would you imagine?
No.
And they just kind of like, and it, the ironic thing is and I've only done it a couple of times. I did it once for a presentation for grant funding, and then once at a Rotary club. And actually, I may have done it twice at two other meetings. But anyways, that's beside the point. But when I'm standing up there in front of the people speaking, both times I could hear from the audience, he looks so happy. Look at that smile. That's what I could hear standing in front of the people when they would see that collage.
And it's like, same thing, like when you put up that picture of Bobby and you're like, look at him. He's very attractive.
Very handsome.
Very,
he had the most awesome blue eyes.
And, or even, when I look at Bobby, I focus for a minute, Aiden. Okay?
Oh, yeah, such a cute little kid.
A teenager. 14
yeah.
years old, 2 years, is it 16? Yeah, it was 16, it was about that age. 2 years away from getting, his driver's license.
Yeah.
A year away from going into high school, finishing the last 4 years of school.
Right.
And, when we show that picture, that's the face of, like I said, that's the face of suicide.
Yeah. It could be anybody.
Yes.
And it's just, yeah.
I draw a correlation, when we talk about, stigma and stereotypes and, what does suicide look like? What does, and if I focus on substance abuse for a moment, and, I looked at the question, I said, when I think back years ago when I was, like in my teens, maybe my early 20s, if someone asked me, describe an alcoholic, in my brain, I would visualize a middle-aged guy, unshaven, a little unkempt, sitting on a corner somewhere on a curb next to a gutter with a bottle of wine concealed by a brown paper bag, leaning over because he was too intoxicated to do anything else.
Right.
And, so of course, that was in that sanitized world, that, stereotypical, this is what I thought. And then, as we fast forward, what does the face of addiction look like? Okay? And I'm like, addiction, or in this case, if I'm talking alcoholism can look like me. Alcoholism could look like you. Alcoholism could look like the dentist that worked on my tooth. Alcoholism can look like that guy sitting on the corner with the brown paper bag.
But it could just as easily be that executive in the high rise.
Exactly, and that's what I said to my students. Yeah, right. Like you can live in the 25-room mansion, on the hillside, or in we call them tent cities, or the smallest tent in a tent city. But it's
and that's one thing I grew up with. My grandfather was an alcoholic. One of my grandfathers was, and so was my dad. And I had mentioned one episode, my dad happened to pass away 5 weeks before my husband. And my dad had fallen and had fractured his back, like in 2 areas. And he was in the hospital for a month. And he was told that if he could go back home, mind you, my parents were in their mid-70s. My mom wouldn't have been able to take care of him on her own. And one of the, I don't know, word is missing my brain. One of the conditions for him to come home was he wasn't going to be able to drink. Because, number one, Mom couldn't take care of him on her own in the condition he was in at that time. And he just kind of gave up. And we thought he was getting better, thought he was going to, come home. He went into rehab and, physical therapy for just like a few days, and then he was like, I'm done.
Right.
And within, a month from his accident, he was gone. And my grandfather, his dad, he fell. He had been drinking, fell and hit his head. And that was the end of him. And, my grandfather ran hotels. My dad had his own business pretty much since I was like 5 years old, businessman in our community. And, but that's just it. It can be anybody.
Right.
It can be anybody. And they can, for a long time, possibly hide it. But then, too, my husband also had an issue with alcohol, and especially towards the end of his life. He had lost his mother 5 years prior to that. And then a childhood friend of his moved down here who also had an alcohol issue, which certainly exacerbated the situation with my husband. And unfortunately, those of us that are family members or friends dealing with somebody like that, you can only do so much.
Right.
You can only do so much, no matter how much you tried. I certainly wished that this person happened to move down here. But in the end, it was still my husband's decision what he did. And when he took his life, his blood alcohol content was 0.315. Now, 0.3, I think it's 0.3 to 0.4, can be deadly. Is that the
It's about right.
deadly level? And that was the only thing that was in his system. And I mean, we had friends that they would say, it's amazing that he pulled off what he did. But I think it was something too that was, looking back, hindsight is
Always 20/20.
yeah, was more than likely something that he had been planning for a while. I think mostly because of his health with his MS, but I'm sure that the issues with the alcohol wasn't helping at all either.
And sometimes we don't know that they have a plan.
Yeah.
Again,
Oh no, I had no idea until afterwards.
Right.
I was at a Rotary meeting, and one of our members asked me if there was, looking back, if there was anything that I see now. And one of the first things that popped up at that time when he asked that question was, he started making the comment that he was never going to see his Social Security. And he was, I think at the time he died, I think he was 4 years from retirement. And I'm like, you got 4 years, it's not a long time. And to me, it was like, because we all kind of joke around, kind of jokingly, but kind of seriously, that, how long is Social Security really going to last, Oh, it's not going to be there by the time I retire, and that's what automatically goes through your mindset. Not, I'm not going to see my Social Security because I'm not going to be here.
Right.
And that was the first thing that when somebody asked me that. And and now there's other things I could see, but it was like, wow. You just even still don't think that unless they actually come out and say they're going to do something, or, there's, other ways that are not as subtle.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, unless there's a history, which that happens, like our friend Kim, when she was on, she said that, her father had attempted many years prior to that. But even still, she didn't think that down the road that he would actually end up completing.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing like, when we, if, we do a contrast to Aiden. I can't think of any incident where, Aiden was, like, okay, kid, I don't call it kid depression. But, there were things where like, this bothers me, this bothers me. Aiden was such a people pleaser. We would, remember when he was, oh God, he had to be maybe 3 or 4, I think it was. Back when I got married, mistake. When I got married, we were, doing some stuff. We were, moving out of the house, and my mom was here, and this was Aiden's personality. My mom was doing something in the house, and Aiden, looked at her and says, "Can I help you?" And my mom was like, "No, honey, I got this." And he was like, "No, Granny," because they call my mother Granny. "No, Granny, I want to help you." And even like when he would come, here to visit, "Nana, what can I help you with? Nana, what can I do?" I was like, "You're on vacation. Enjoy yourself. Like, it's fine." Or he's, very quiet. The boys weren't taking turns on the video game. He did not complain. And I, just remember, talking to Kira about it, where one of the things that she said, and I'm going to paraphrase, I hope I don't get this, wrong, if I don't misspeak, but the gist of it was, he went to bed that night and lied to me. It was the sense of, I asked him, was he okay? Or how was he doing? And he said he was fine. But as he went upstairs to go to bed that night, that was a lie, because he knew what he was going to do. And I think to myself, did he know what he was going to do? But I recall as we were driving, back to Kansas for, the service, periodically, Carl, his dad was, calling me, and I was like, okay, this is where I am, hang on, wait. And, they said they got, they had his phone. And they're trying to figure out, like, how to get into his phone. And they finally, figured out how to, get past, the screen protect and whatnot. And the only thing, I'm listening to, the pain and anguish, from, both, Carl and Kira, and his siblings, at that, is he took a picture of himself in the closet and sent it to a couple of friends. And, of course, nobody said anything. And, not bashing the kid, not bashing, these children, mind you.
Well, they probably had no idea what to do with that information.
Well, and I think, part of it was, did they not know what to do with it? Or was it a situation where they thought he was joking?
Well, yeah.
It's a prank.
Right.
But then, of course, we go back and we look at, the process, and, like, again, you said that hindsight is 20/20. Was it a situation where it was, I don't want to call it a prank, but was it a situation that just went too far and he got himself in a situation that he couldn't get out of? I'm going to, he died, he hung himself in his closet. So I'm going to, go through this motion. I'm going to take a picture of myself. But then, with the intent was not to complete. But did he, I get to here, all of a sudden he's at step 10, not really meaning to get to step 10. But he had no way to call for help, or, was he calling for help and no one heard him? And yeah, we still question to the day, what if someone would have called, showed their mom, hey, look at this,
Right.
And someone would have called Kira. Go in Aiden's room right now, there's a problem. We don't know the answers to that question because there's been no communication with the other, people that were sent that text message from him.
Yeah, it's really difficult, especially for kids that age. My great niece, probably a year or two ago, and I don't know if I can't remember. I think it happened after she had known how Bob had died. Not at the beginning. We didn't tell the girls for a few years because of their age. But my oldest great niece, Haley, she was at school one day, and like I said, this was a couple of years ago, so I think she was probably like 11, and she heard a girl talking, and red flags flew up with my niece, and she immediately, I don't remember exactly how the scenario went. I think she immediately went and told her mom. They called the school and ended up saving that young girl's life. But Haley she comes from it from kind of having the experience. And she actually she found out, she participates in our yearly fundraiser, Art for Hope. And the first year she wanted to participate, and I told my nephew, I said, you're going to have to tell her how Bobby died, not, but by suicide, not exactly how, but, and I kept telling him, if she's going to be there, this is what you're going to have to do. And they kept the youngest one home. And so then the night of our first annual Art for Hope, my nephew shows up, and I'm like, where's the girls? And they're on their way. Amy's telling her now, and I was the one freaking out. I'm like, she's on her way to this major event and finding out that her uncle died by suicide. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how she was going to react. She was 10 years old probably, I think at the time. And she came in, and I saw her out of the corner of my eye, and this girl is amazing. She just ran up to me and gave me a huge hug. And she got up on stage and helped out with the auction of her door, her vintage door that she had written lyrics from a song on. Turned out really great. Raised like $1,700 for the foundation that night. And she was just so poised, and she just it was amazing how she handled it after just finding out. Of course, it was probably 2 years after Bobby had died. And but unless I think that, like I said, I think that really came from the lived experience and having knowing that her uncle died this way. And most kids don't have that, and which you really don't want kids to have that experience. really. I mean, you have 8 siblings and cousins and everything that have that lived experience now.
Yeah, it's difficult enough, as adults, navigating through these experiences. And when you add that layer on, now we have, children that you have to explain, things like this to, and doing it in a way that they understand, doing it in a way that is, let's say at their level. Like when I'm talking to, parents, about, how do I talk to my child about this, or how do I deal with this, and I always tell them, meet them at their level, meet them at their level, as you talk to, which is why, I'm glad for us, and I think this is a nice segue into, having, resources at our disposal. Like, I love this book.
Isn't this book great? Yeah. This was actually one of the first books that I read by Dr. Wolfelt, and then ordered another set of books from his Center for Life and Lost Transition, I think is what the name of his center is, out in Colorado. And I have read a lot of books on grief and suicide and, widow suicide, and, I got stacks of them in my office. And when I came across this one, really resonated with me more than any of the other ones have. I liked from at the very beginning, and this, if anybody is familiar with Marianne Williamson, she's a great writer, speaker, kind of like, I don't want to say like self-help, but she's people that know her know what she does. But anyways, he has a quote at the beginning of this book: "In every heart there is an inner room where we can hold our greatest treasures and our deepest pain." And I know we all feel that, and it's a physical pain that you feel with this, and a deep physical pain. I had mentioned before that I had lost my first husband many, many years ago, and it was a horrible experience. I will always miss him. It was a tragic death also, but this pain of suicide and finding my husband is like a pain no other.
And it is. It's, we sit back and we think about, different losses, and to that point, that each loss hits us differently.
Yeah.
I mean, there are instances where, this loss feels almost the same as another. Like I think back, for instance, when I lost my grandfather, my mom's dad. Now, I was raised primarily, my early years with my grandparents. And I happened to be, I was stationed in Germany at the time, military. And I remember flying home. This is bringing Carl, and at this time, Carl was my only child. I was bringing Carl, back stateside, spent some time with my family, while I was deployed overseas. And, my grandfather, he had a couple of strokes and whatnot. So it was, I think, we expected that he was, he was at, end of, going through the end of life process. But I remember as I was getting in, I was in the car, with my mom and my dad, and, headed back to McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey. And I remember Mom saying, "What's the matter?" And I just remember processing with her. I think the next time I come home, it's going to be because he's gone. And, I was right. 10 days later, he was gone. But I was comforted in a sense, that, okay, Daddy was, he was, later in life. He, had health
Right.
issues. He had strokes. But I think one of the things that made his death less, I don't even want to say less painful. I was prepped for it, for one. But I remember my grandmother telling me, he was waiting for you to come home. And it was like he was hanging on. Because I remember when I was leaving, I looked at him, "You better be here when I get back." And he was like, "Oh, it's up to, my grandparents were, very spiritual people. It's up to the good Lord." But 10 days later, he was gone. And, so I think about that loss. This is the most important man in my life. Hands down, the most important. Nobody will ever take my grandfather's place. Now, when I contrast that to, 10 years later, 10 years later when my grandmother passed, it was unexpected. The doctors expected her, she's going to be around now. So back in she was in her 90s. It's like, okay, but they did not expect her to go. And again, death kind of was like, all right, she's in her 90s. She led a good life. Wasn't prepared for a 14-year-old grandson.
No.
This is not supposed to happen. Wasn't prepared for a 33-year-old son. It wasn't supposed to happen. I'm like, wait a minute. How do we process all this? So again, I like when, we have other people's perspectives. When you read something, you're like, this. And then usually that's the one
Right.
word that I say, this. And that's all I can say because there's no other, it needs no other explanation. It needs nothing else. It's this. I like when he said, there's a misconception that says grief following a suicide death always results in a complicated or pathological mourning. And, when, we think about, suicide loss, do we process the grief at the same level? Is our grief different?
I think it is totally different. It just even using my own experience between both my husbands, and I had mentioned before, Bobby had MS for 25 years, and we were extremely fortunate to have him for 25 years, mm-hmm. relatively healthy. But as time went on and years went on, we were together nearly 30 years. MS is a progressive disease. It's mm-hmm. not something that he was going to recover from. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that was ever going to get better. It was going to get worse, and it had over the years had gotten worse and gotten better. He had remitting. It came and went, mm-hmm. and he had a really bad exacerbation. I think the fall before he took his life, probably one of the worst he had since he had probably been first diagnosed, mm-hmm. and thought that we got him back to the best level that we could at the time. He was still working. He was a land surveyor. That's a very physical job, mm-hmm. And at 61, 62 years old, and he could still outwork anybody. But was he hiding his, really what was going on with him. And as time went on, I mean, I had to be realistic too, that I had conditioned myself, I guess, that I always figured I was going to lose him because of his disease.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, you kind of mentally prepare for that with somebody with a chronic illness. I was not prepared to find him in the backyard.
Which, to Dr. Wolfelt's point here, where we go through that trauma, and the, constant questioning, why, and I remember, as I was going through school, a lot of professors, would tell us, stay away from the word why. And here's what they said about this. When you say why, it tends to bring up thoughts of blame. Why did you do that? Why did, With us, however, when we're dealing with, loss of someone from a suicide, we're processing all of that, the whys.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But we also go through the coulda, shoulda, wouldas.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I think, again, going back to Aiden, for example, and I guess even Patrick, but let me focus on Aiden for a moment. What if I'd never moved to Florida?
Yeah, you've said that
What
before,
if, what if I would have gone back to, to the Midwest, if I'd gone back to Kansas more often? What if, and I think about conversations that I had, how many times I heard the kids, we miss you, Nana, we miss you were still here, we wish you hadn't moved away, we wish you weren't so far away, we miss being able to drive, 10 minutes across town, from our house to your house versus you're now 1,200 miles away. And with Patrick, what if I would not have gotten on that plane? What if, my high school reunion was not that weekend, if it was the following weekend? What if, my car was in the shops? Patrick was left the weekend without a car, and he was, depending on friends getting back. What if Patrick had my car? Would he have, because I get this feeling that he just felt isolated. But along with processing all of that, we're also sometimes, and I would say unintentional, traumatized on a secondary level from our, from friends and families or people who mean well. Oh my God, I can't believe he did that. Or, they say something. I always talk about, again, I know this is more likely a repeat, but I talk about, in an interview when I was asked, you're a mental health professional.
Right.
How'd this happen to you?
Well, it goes back to, again, it can happen to anybody.
True. And, I don't say anything about, I don't explain that question to anybody before, like I don't precurse it. Well,
right.
Before I got asked that question, this is what he said to me to kind of set me up that I'm going to ask you a question that, and people was like, that was really rude. Then I say, okay, now let me save him, because this is what he said to me before he asked the question. I don't want you to take this question the wrong way. Now, this is an interviewer. He knew what he was doing. I mean,
Exactly.
This guy's phenomenal. And I love, I'll have to, send him an email. It's like, can I talk about you on my show? Like, can I mention you by name? I'm sure I could.
I'm sure he wouldn't mind.
But, because you know who I'm talking about.
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
But anyway, like I said, he's amazing at what he does. All right. He, being who he was skilled enough to be able to, state to me, I'm going to ask you a question. It may, the question itself might sound, insensitive. But there's a reason. And I tell him there's a reason why he asked that question.
Right, exactly.
And it is to that point. it's not discriminatory. You know, and I think we don't think about the secondary, you know, trauma or the, you know, the secondary impact, you know, of well-wishers or, you know, people who, you know, are trying to help us with our grief, or, you know, as Dr. Wolfelt said in his book, he calls it secondary victimization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first I'm dealing with the death of my loved one, and now I'm dealing with the what appears to be well wishes, but it's, you know, it's affecting me in a different way, like I'm being victimized, you know, again, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh, and particularly in within a suicide death,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, and if people have not experienced that, then it's foreign to them, and they don't understand it, and that's happened to me from, you know, several people. Some was intentional,
Mm-hmm.
and some was not. But yeah, you do have that. And remember, we've throughout have talked about the different stages
Mm-hmm.
of grief, and I didn't know this. I've just always known the different stages of grief since the death of my first husband. But it was actually Dr. Wolfelt has in his book with misconceptions of grief and mourning, and we've said this even before. The grief and mourning progress is predictable or in orderly stages, which it's not. That's the misconception. And it says here, the concept of stages was popularized in 1969 with the publication of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's text on death and dying. She never intended for the stages to be interpreted as rigid, linear sequence to be followed by all mourners. And we've always said from the very beginning of the show that is so absolutely true.
And if you've never read that book,
yeah,
it is, and I mean,
I haven't, so now I'm going to have to go back and get another book. But
it is interesting when you sit back. That book was written in '69.
In '69, yeah.
And you know, it was. I mean, it's considered a landmark book, and even back then, it was recognized that grief is not linear. It's not, all right, now you've gone through stage one, and stage one is going to last for a week, and then stage two is going to last for, actually, you know, stage one being denial. Stage one is going to last for a day. You know, you hear, you know, your loved one is gone, and, you know, like, really? That's not true. No, here's, you know, let's just say if you have to go to the medical examiner's office, or in the case of Pat, you know, got a plea. Why would this officer, you know, tell me a lie? All right, okay, denial over.
Yeah.
Let's move on to stage two. You know, like, no, it doesn't work that way.
No, and you could get almost close to the end of the stages, and something will trigger, and you could probably just as easily go back to the beginning.
You know, it's interesting that you say this, because, like, for myself, experienced that this week. You know, where it's like you think you're over here,
Mm-hmm.
and you end up back over here. You know, this weekend was kind of like, I found myself.
You've had a week from, oh my gosh.
You know, and I asked myself, you know, as we were getting ready to do the show, you know, today, am I gonna talk about it? You know, am I going to?
Yeah,
say
no, I was waiting. I was leaving that totally up to you, because oh my gosh.
You know, guys, when we talk about the show, you know, we have said that it is raw, that, you know, this is real life. This is, we're sharing our stories and hope, in the hope, so thus, hope, that someone else gets it. And it's not about a pity party or look at me.
Oh, no, not at all.
But I look at, where, I was in the stages of grief. I'm not going to say that I was right over here in acceptance. I think it's going to be a long time before I get to acceptance.
I haven't even got to acceptance.
It's going to be a minute, yes. But, Saturday, this all started Saturday. I get a phone call from my daughter. She's hysterical. What's going on? Her youngest daughter, her grandma passed away on Saturday. Excuse me. And I'm like, what? And I remember, calling my granddaughter's dad. He lives, here in Pasco, close to me. My daughter is, in Tampa and Pinellas, Hillsborough County. And I just remember calling him, and, of course, he's hysterical. His, father passed away when he was 7. His mom has been his only parent for, 7, and I think he's in his 30s now. 30 years. That's all he had was mom. Mom's gone. I'm telling him. And I'm sitting back thinking, okay, all right, here's another death to deal with. And it wasn't like I was insensitive. It's like I didn't know her, but I'm thinking, well, this affects my granddaughter.
Right.
She's FaceTiming with her other, I think she called her grandma. I'm Nana, that was grandma. So she FaceTimes grandma like every weekend. We still have not told her that grandma's gone. Well, then, Sunday rolls around, and I'm looking at my news feed, and one of my favorite aunts in Kansas, she passed away. I'm like, what's going on here? What's going on here? And they say it comes in threes.
Mm-hmm.
Because Monday evening, as I wake up Tuesday morning, and one of my friends, I'm looking at his wife, is posting to his page, hey, family and friends, this is, his wife. He was killed on a DUI crash, Monday. And, she's like, the story's right here. So anyway, I read the story, and it's like this woman, she admits drinking Hennessy or, whatnot.
I read the article.
But, yeah, she ends up, when it was all said and done, the passenger in her car died. My friend, he was on his motorcycle. Motorcycle's unrecognizable, knocked his helmet off. He's gone. The woman in the SUV that she hit, thankfully this woman had a seatbelt on, so she was, and
she walks away.
She walks away with, a couple of bruises. And I think about, oh my gosh, this, here we go, back over here again.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear, of course, we're going back to that. I'm not going to call it secondary victimization, but it can be translated into that. You're the strongest person I know.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to be strong.
You don't see me behind closed doors when I go home at night by myself.
Sometimes it's like, I don't want to be strong.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you don't, you can handle it. You don't get more than you can handle. It's like, okay, don't you think we've had enough?
Exactly. Yeah,
don't you think we've had enough?
I don't
but
want
it's, and everybody experiences their grief differently. And we had mentioned last week the Suicide Survivors Bill of Rights that's at the end of this book. And the first one is, I have the right to experience my own unique grief. We're all going to experience our grief differently. And
number 2,
yeah,
I think was...
Can you read that? You got that?
What I liked about number 2...
I have the right to talk about my grief.
Which is, it's like, you know what? I want to talk about this.
I find it better to talk about it, but you have to be kind of in a way selective as to who you talk
Correct.
about it with, because there are some people that are it kind of goes back to what we said earlier. You have, with the secondary victimization, you have the people that do good and mean well, and then you have the people that don't. And you're going to get that with number 2.
And, I think what happens too when, we say it's okay to talk about grief, that, to your point, we go through these things where if I am talking about it, am I saying, look at me, pity me, pity me? When it's not, more oftentimes than not, for those of us, and I don't want to say us, I'm going to use that word globally.
Right.
It's cathartic in a way.
It is.
You
can't keep that stuff bottled up.
Correct. I mean, people like us, or as I say, amongst my friends, and I think I shared this, interestingly, how many people that I've graduated, women, and I'm focusing on the ladies for a moment, how many women, girls that I graduated high school with, and we're all in this, mothers who have buried our children. And we give ourselves permission to talk about our grief, because
and that's a safe zone, because you're, like us, you're in a club that no parent wants to be a member of.
Exactly.
We're in another one that nobody wants to be a part of.
Exactly.
And I think it's good to share, and like you said, it's not that we're looking for sympathy or woe is me. It's really not that. And really, I mean, we have been so fortunate to be given this platform, because what it is really is to help people. I was hesitant to share my story for a year and a half. Of course, I wasn't even ready to do that. But every single time that I did, from the very beginning, from the very first time, I have had people come up to me thanking me for sharing my story, for talking about it. And many of them hadn't even talked about their experience in years because of the stigma. And that has been what has propelled me to start our fundraiser for Art for Hope and start the Bobby White Foundation, so that we can be the voice and hopefully reduce the stigma,
Right.
save some lives in the meantime. Our last in-person fundraiser, we did exactly that. We ended up saving a woman's life who was going to take her life. And after our event, she decided that she couldn't do that to her son.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know what's going to happen for Art for Hope this year yet. We are going to start having our meetings next month, but we don't know what we're going to do with that yet. But there's ways that you guys can help, support us so that we can continue to bring this show to you. We are lining up more guests. We want to bring more information. We're going to go through more information in the wilderness of suicide grief, finding your way, and bring other books by Dr. Wolfelt to you. But you can, one way right now is Greg Schindler's State Farm Office is doing a fundraiser for us. And it's running through the end of the month, so that's till the end of this week.
Another week.
You can call to get an insurance quote and mention the Bobby White Foundation, and they're going to donate money back to us towards the programming for this show. There's several other ways. If you purchase off Amazon, everybody's doing it now because nobody can really still kind of go anywhere. Choose the Bobby White Foundation as your charity of choice. You have to do it through smile.amazon.com, but once you choose your charity, it stays on your page until you change it, and a portion of that money goes to back to the foundation.
There was the QR, the QR
Oh yeah,
code.
the QR code. That's for Kindest, who we had partnered with to raise money. Also, that'll take you directly to the website for the fundraiser for the programming, and there is a slew of options for you as to how much you want to donate, as little as $5. And hey, feel really generous, $25,000, and we get a year's worth of programming.
If you sit back and think about it, politicians, it's the grassroots. It's those $5, $10 donations.
Those $5, $10 donations, and plus it helps us with our Purple Folder program for suicide loss survivors. This is our first updated version, funded through our donations, and we'd like to get these out to loss survivors as soon as we can after a suicide death. So, just remember that if you or anybody you know is in a bad place, call 911. There's numbers to call, and just call the National Suicide Hotline, and remember, there's always hope.